The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone and welcome to today's advanced webinar. My name is Marietta Valev and I am a representative of the Gateway to Global Aging data team. Today we will be using some of the harmonized datasets created by the Gateway to Global Aging as well as the RAND Corporation. Before we begin, I would like to point out that the program you downloaded for this webinar from the handouts section is in a .doc format. However, you'd be able to convert that into a stata.do file by simply changing the extension from a .doc to a .do. I also wanted to let you know that you can feel free to ask questions during this webinar into either the chat box or the question box, and our colleague Hye-Won Kim would be here to translate should you like to ask the questions in Korean. Please type the questions as they come to mind. However, I will address those at the end of the webinar. The research question today is, are there country-level differences in the longitudinal patterns of disability onset by gender, age, or education level in Korea and the US? Here are the steps we will take in order to perform our analysis. First, we need to create the Harmonized KLoSA dataset. KLoSA is the dataset for respondents from Korea. Second, we need to download the RAND HRS data, which would be for the US. Thirdly, we will download the harmonized HRS data, which is also for US and is for the exact same sample of respondents as are in the RAND HRS. The harmonized HRS is a supplemental dataset to the RAND HRS and contains variables not included in the RAND HRS dataset. So the two are used as complements and as complements to one another. The fourth step we need to take is to identify comparable measures in KLoSA and in HRS. Then we're going to create a pooled dataset with observations from both the HRS and KLoSA surveys. We will prepare the variables, apply some weights, and then perform analysis on disability prevalence across countries, as well as disability onset across countries. The first step, as I mentioned earlier, would be to create our harmonized KLoSA dataset. We will do so by downloading the 6 waves of KLoSA data from the KEIS website, which is easily accessible through the Gateway page in the Downloads tab. Let me show you how. So if you go to our Downloads tab, you can just click on that and it will display all available datasets as well as all available materials or links to those. In order to go to the Korea Employment Information Services website, we simply click to the link here and it'll redirect us to the needed location. As a reminder, I just wanted to let you know that in order to download the KLoSA data, you would have to be registered with them, and you can also do so by clicking on the link over here, which will actually help you register and have access to all the HRS family study datasets. The second step would be to download the harmonized KLoSA's data creation code, which could also be found on the very same page at the Gateway, just a couple of lines down. So let me show you where that is. Again, if we look under KLoSA, we can download the Harmonized KLoSA data creation code by clicking on this link. It would give you a little bit of explanation as to how to download the code and what to do once downloaded. And by clicking here, you'll be able to actually download the code. The third thing, once the code is downloaded, would be to edit the folder location of the original KLoSA data into this data creation code, as well as edit the folder location where you would like to be saving the Harmonized KLoSA dataset. And here's what this data creation code looks like. I have highlighted lines 12 and 13, and you would be able to change the locations of the original data in between the pipes in line 12 and to the location where I would like to save the Harmonized KLoSA in line 13. Please remember to also remove the pipes. In order to finish the creation of the Harmonized KLoSA data, we need to now run the KLoSA creation code. And once we have that, we can also download the Harmonized KLoSA codebook, which is extremely useful as it explains how all the variables in the dataset were created, as well as pointing out differences between the variables in the Harmonized KLoSA and RAND or Harmonized HRS, depending on the variable. You can also find this information in the very same section of the Gateway to Global Aging, and it is called Harmonized KLoSA Codebook. So you can just click here. Another reminder is that in order to download any of the information from our website, you'd have to be registered for it, and generally the button is available up here on the right hand side and it just says register. So if you click on that, you'll be able to register for our website as well if you haven't done so already. Next, we would like to download the RAND HRS and Harmonized HRS datasets. Links to those are also available in the same section of our website. And I will point that out for you. So here's the HRS column, all the materials that are available, and you can use those links to go to the Michigan website and download both RAND HRS and Harmonized HRS. Okay, now that we have all the data sets that we need for our analysis, we would need to identify some comparable measures to use for the question that we're interested in. The few variables that we would need to find are the functional status, which would be identified by the 5-item ADL. We will ask the question about whether there are any differences by gender, so we would need the gender, whether there are any differences by level of education, so we will grab that, as well as age groups, so we would look for an age variable. I would advise you to try to find comparable measures by going to our website and using the resources we offer. There are several different ways in which you can approach this. You can visit our documentation section. You can use our concordance searches, download and look at our harmonized codebooks, or I will show you a fourth option, which is simply going to our surveys at a glance, in which we have two ways of searching. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, I will be interested in conveying our analysis by gender. So we can simply look at keywords. Let's type gender. We know we'll be interested in analyzing the US and Korea. So we'll pick the Harmonized HRS Harmonized KLoSA and RAND HRS. And you'd notice that as soon as we click on those two, we down here have the available years in both datasets. And now that I've selected all options I will press search. That comes up with the results by harmonized dataset. In RAND HRS, we see that the gender variable is called RA gender. In the harmonized KLoSA, it's also called RA gender. And again, that's the purpose of harmonization for the variables to be, if variables are comparable, to be named the same. You will see that the harmonized HRS popped up as well, and that's because we searched by keyword, and hence anything that has to do with gender would show up in here as well. But the RA gender variable, which is comparable between the harmonized KLoSA and the HRS, would be found in the RAND HRS dataset. Okay. As a background, I just wanted to mention to you that what ADL stands for and sort of tell you what are the 5 items that actually enter into the ADL summary. So ADL is just the activities of daily living. Both KLoSA and HRS measure those. And both of the surveys actually have, or both of the harmonized surveys have 5-item ADL summary. And that includes questions on whether the respondent has difficulties bathing, dressing, eating, getting in and out of bed, as well as using the toilet by themselves. Okay, let's look at KLoSA and see what are the variables that we need to pull from there. I've decided to look at the year 2008 and 2014, which are represented by wave 2 and wave 5 respectively. The variables that we'll be looking at are personal identifier, which is PID, the 5 items ADL summary in both 2008 and 2014, which would be R2 ADL5 and R5 ADL5, where R stands for the respondent, the number stands for the wave from which the variable comes from, and ADL5 is the variable. We'll also look at gender, which is RA gender, education level, which is RA educ, the age of the respondent in 2008, which would be R2 age Y, and the individual analysis weight in 2008, which would be R2 weight RESP. Now we're going to identify the variables that would come from RAND HRS. Again, years of interest are 08 and 14. The waves that are represented by those years are 9 and 12 in RAND and harmonized HRS datasets. The variables that we'll be looking at from the RAND dataset are personal identifier, which is HHIDPN, the gender, again, the age in 2008, and the individual analysis weight in 2008. To supplement those variables, we would have to look at the harmonized HRS the harmonized HRS dataset, and the variables that we will be grabbing from there are, again, the personal identifier, which we'll use in order to merge the RAND HRS and harmonized HRS. But the 2 variables that we'll add to the RAND HRS would be the 5-item ADL summary and the education level, which are not present in the RAND HRS. There are other measures of ADL and education there, but they're not exactly comparable to those in the harmonized KLoSA, and that is why we're pulling those which are identical. Now to this data code. So first we're going to read the RAND HRS observations and variables. And in doing so, we will use the most up-to-date version available, and only keeping the variables of interest, because the breadth of variables that's out there is a lot wider, but for our analysis, we've decided we're going to look at only a few specific ones. Once we bring in the RAND HRS dataset, we are going to generate a variable called ISO country code equal to 840 to represent the respondents from the US. Secondly, we'll merge the harmonized HRS dataset to the RAND HRS dataset. And this is going to be a one-to-one merge by the respondent's ID, because, as I said, both datasets comprise of the exact same respondents. And we'll only be keeping the variables of interest from the harmonized HRS dataset, which are the ADO summary in 08, in 14, and the education level. So we're adding those to the previously extracted variables from RAND. Thirdly, we're going to bring in the Korean data, and that would be by appending the KLoSA dataset, or the Harmonized KLoSA dataset, and again, keeping just the variables of interest. And we will assign 410 as the ISO country for the respondents from Korea. Next, let me show you the Stata code for this and execution. Okay. Oh my gosh. Okay. Just let me navigate through. Okay. So I would like to show you the results of the merge, just because they're slightly different from expected, perhaps. You can see that there are 4,558 observations that were actually in the RAND HRS, but not in the harmonized HRS. This is only happening because RAND just released their newest dataset, which includes a new cohort of respondents, which are the late baby bloomers born between the years of 1960 and 1965. And we have not had a chance to incorporate those into the harmonized HRS, but hold on tight and we'll have that available for you as well. However, we do have everything matching for the years up to 2014. So this change won't really affect our analysis, since we're looking at year 2008 and 2014, and the new information for which you see more observations is for 2016. But I just wanted to point that out to you in case you're running this program and it doesn't make sense to you that they're not matching completely. Okay, let's return. So the next thing we're going to do is prepare our variables. And we need to adjust for the difference in wave numbers and make sure that we create variables that are consistent across the respondents from Korea and respondents from the US. So the first one which we need to create would be the ADO5 summary. We'll use the year since to unify the two variables into one. And you will see, if you remember, that 410 was the code for Korea, that the Korean wave for 2008 was R2, and the US wave for 2008 was R9, and was 9. Therefore, the difference in names and the need for us to unify. We'll do the same for the ADL5 summary for 2014, and age as well as weight variables. And let me run those for you. So you'd see that this just generates the additional variables. If you browse the data set, you would observe the changes. Next, we're going to create an indicator of any ADL difficulty. And we can do that by using the egen command, which is a very powerful generation command. Used with the cut option, it creates a new categorical variable coded with the ends of the grouping intervals specified in the at option. In our case, we will have a binary variable equal to 0 when the ADL5 is 0, or when it's between 0 and 1, excluding 1. And it will be 1 when the ADL5 variable is greater than or equal to 1 and less than 6. Then we'll create our indicator of whether able individuals experience an onset of ADL difficulty. This means it'll be 1 if it'll be 0 if the person did not experience any difficulties in 2008 and did not experience any difficulties in 2014 either. The indicator would be 1 if the respondent did not experience any ADL difficulties in 2008, but did experience difficulties in 2014. Let's run the program for this portion. Okay. The next thing we would like to create will be 5 age categories in our age variable. Again, by using the egen in combination with the cut option and specifying where the cuts for each group are going to be. And here we'll see a few groups when the first one would be 55 through 59, the second would be 60 through 64, and so on. In the second command, we will flag the observations which will make our sample. We'll keep respondents in the first 4 age groups for whom the ADL onset variable is not missing, as we would like to examine if there has been a change in the report of difficulties with any of the 5 ADLs. Let's run the program. Next, we're going to apply the weights, and we'll do that using the SVY set command in order to identify the survey design variables, and in doing so, adjust for multiple country sampling and apply the 2008 weights given in each of the 2 surveys. Here, we're performing a prospective analysis, and the question of the matter is, where would 2008 respondents in our sample be in 6 years or in 2014? Let's run this portion. When we move on to the analysis, first we would look at the prevalence of disability, or how common disability is in 2008 in Korea and the US. So we have two separate commands, each one representing each country. And let's go ahead and run those. So you can see the results displayed for Korea first and for the US second. However, if we're interested in looking at both countries, we can do so by combining this into one command and making sure that we include the over option, which would tell Stata to do the estimates by country. So because we're not looking at everyone in the population who has a weight, we also have to specify that we're interested only in the first 4 age groups. And we can do that by either asking that the age category variable is in list 0 through 3, or by saying that the sample flag should be equal to 1. And as a reminder, sample equal to 1 only when the age groups were 0 through 3 and we had a non-missing onset of ADLs. Let's run this code. And now you'd see that the results are actually coming together, and it's a lot easier to compare in this table format than if we ran the command separately. We can see that for the sample that we're looking at, the estimates are 2.85% of prevalence of disability in Korea and 11.2% of prevalence in the US. We can also look at those results graphically. And that makes the comparison slightly easier. Next, we would like to look at the onset of disability in Korea and the US. The question here becomes, what is the estimated percentage of people who did not experience any ADL difficulties in 2008, but experienced some in 2014? Let's run the program. According to our sample, the estimated onset of disability in Korea is about 2.41%, and the estimated onset of disability for the US is about 10.4%. Let's take a look at a graphical representation of the results. Next, we may want to ask ourselves if the onset of disability is different, not just across countries, but also across age groups. Programmatically, this is done by simply adding the 2008 age category variable to the ISO country variable in the over option of the command, which is otherwise the same as the one we just used in the prior analysis. Okay, so let's run that. Here we can see that people in the age groups of 55 to 59 in Korea, or subpopulation 1, has an onset of 0.55%, whereas their counterparts in the US, subpopulation 5, has an onset of 8.2%. Let's look at a graphical representation of our results. So here, as expected, we can see that the general pattern is upward trending with each age group in each country. On a closer look, we notice that the step pattern is different for the 55 through 59 age group and 60 to 64 in the two countries. In Korea, you can see that the difference between those two groups is a lot larger compared to their counterparts in the US. Thirdly, we may want to examine if the onset of disability is different for men and women in Korea and the US. Programmatically, this is also done simply by adding the RA gender variable to the ISO country variable and in the over option of the command, which is otherwise the same as the ones we run for the prior two examples. Let's run the program. And perhaps look at the representation of the results graphically. Here we can see that females in Korea, or subpopulation 2, have a slightly lower onset of disability at 2.38% than their male counterparts at 2.44%. The difference between males and females in the US is much more noticeable, and also the onset in women is higher than in this case. But we might also want to investigate and see if these differences are actually statistically significant. To do so, we will test the linear hypothesis after we have done our estimation. In the first case, we will test whether the estimated coefficients of disability onset for males in Korea is the same as the estimated coefficient for the females in Korea. In Stata, we use the test command, which performs an adjusted weld test of simple or composite linear hypothesis on the specific coefficients of the most recently estimated model. Let's run the tests. We can see that the significance level of the test performed for Korea is 90.72%, and hence we can't reject the hypothesis at either the 5% or the 10% level. If we look at the test for the US, we can see that we can reject the hypothesis that the coefficients for the male and female are the same at both the 10 and the 5% significance levels, as the level of significance of the test is 2.38%. Following in the next analysis, we may like to ask the question of what is the onset of disability by education level across the different countries. And here we will also test to see if there's a difference between low and high education levels and the onset of disability, both in Korea and the US. So let's run our program. Here we can see that people that have a higher education have a lower onset, and that is true for both the US and Korea. And if we test to see whether people with only primary education have statistically significantly different or the same estimate as those with tertiary education, we see that we cannot reject the hypothesis that they're the same at either the 5, 10, or 1%, 5, 10, or 1% level. So this is pretty strong. Same for the respondents in the US, which are subpopulation 4 for primary and subpopulation 6 for tertiary education. And again, here we can't reject the hypothesis that they're different. I'm sorry, not the same, but different. Okay, let's look at graphical representation of these results. One thing that you may notice here is that the 95% confidence interval for this group goes below 0. And perhaps this is because we actually have a fairly small sample that happens to have a completed tertiary education. Once we apply all of the restrictions for our sample, we have only about 334 individuals. Lastly, we may want to analyze the disability onset by country, gender, and age cohort. And again, programmatically, this is very similar to the tests we previously performed. The only difference would be including all 3 variables over which we would like to perform the analysis. And then we can test for different age groups and men and women, so combinations of age and gender, to see whether our results are statistically significant. So if we run that, you would see all of your results. And I forgot to mention that you have a legend of the representation of each subpopulation up here, and then the results are displayed underneath. We can take a peek at a graphical representation of those, since it's a little bit easier to look at. And again, you will see that the step patterns in Korea for women and men are upward trending. However, in males, you'd see the 2 age groups, 60 to 64 and 65 to 69, being a lot closer than for female representatives, respondents, which for those 2 age groups are a lot more different. But we do expect the trend to go up as the person is in a higher age group. This pattern is similar for females in the US, but slightly different from males, where we see a dip in the offset for people who are in the 60 to 64 age cohort. And that concludes today's webinar. Before I give you a chance to ask questions, I would like to let you know that these slides, the program we used, and the video from this webinar will be available on our website within 24 hours and can be found in the recent presentations sections of the documentation tab. Let me show you where that's located. Okay, so if you go under documentation and look at the recent presentations, you'll be able to find the slides, this data code, and the video, just like you currently see for our prior webinars. Okay, this webinar would also be followed by a brief questionnaire about the webinar, and your participation is greatly appreciated as it would help us tailor these presentations to be as relevant as possible to you. Thank you once more for your participation. I will remain on line for a few minutes to answer all your questions. And as I mentioned before, Heywan would also be here if you'd like to type those in Korean, and she will translate for us. Please also visit us at g2aging.org. And if you have any questions feel free to email us at help@g2aging.org, and one of our representatives will do our best to respond within 24 hours as well. Okay, I will take a peek at your questions now. Okay, so our first question is, someone was wondering why the gateway does not provide harmonized KLoSA data like RAND HRS, because our user is not a Stata user, and it's difficult to create a harmonized KLoSA data set. Unfortunately, we're unable to actually distribute the KLoSA data in any form. That's why you'd need to have Stata just to run the Stata creation code. And once you run that, you'd be able to transfer it into a SAS or SPSS dataset using stat transfer or any other software, or just reading the Stata dataset directly into the software that you're using. But unfortunately, for the Stata creation code, you'd have to use Stata in order to create the harmonized KLoSA. Okay, and the next question is, was there any difference in the survey collection procedure between the two countries? And if you look at our website and click on Surveys at a Glance, the Survey Overview tab will actually tell you what the general differences between all of the surveys actually are. Also, if you're planning on using the harmonized datasets, a great place to look would be our codebooks, because each one of them would actually compare the survey. So if we're looking at KLoSA and we're looking at Korea, it'll compare the KLoSA dataset and how the variables there differ from the variables in the RAND and harmonized HRS. So there's a section under each variable which would actually go through all the differences. and that makes life a lot easier. The follow-up question is, if there was a difference in the design, would there be a possible source of bias? And yes, there could be. That's perhaps why certain adjustments are indeed needed. And you can see, for example, that in HRS, the age eligibility was at age 51. In KLoSA, that was 45. Also, when it comes to spousal inclusion, the spouses in the US were included irrespective of their age, if the respondent is included and is at 51, whereas in KLoSA, only eligible spouses would be included, and hence the spouse would have to be 45 or over as well. The next question is, can I use strata 1 for US and 0 for Korea? And the answer is yes, as long as the two values are different from one another, you can. Okay, the next question is asking whether we have SAS creation code, because we have SAS users as well. We don't have the creation code in SAS. However, we do have some webinars that will give you examples of how to convert code from SAS to Stata, from Stata to SAS, sorry. The next question is whether Harmonized KLoSA data still keeps the features of surveying couples in the household. I believe that to be the case. If there is an eligible respondent, or if both this respondent and spouse are eligible, they would be in the data set. The next question, which is quite important, is someone was able to go to the KEIS website and is asking which version of the data should be downloaded. There are 4 types: raw, structured, light, and imputed. We would have to download the raw Stata files as well as the imputed Stata files. And just to add to the answer, if you do go to our downloads page and click on this data creation code for KLoSA, you will see a little bit more information listed down here, and hopefully that will be helpful for you. And then there's a question about whether you need to modify any of the variable names of the downloaded KLoSA data in order to run the data creation code for KLoSA. And you shouldn't have to, but if you run into any problems, please feel free to email us and we'll resolve the issues. And the other part of the question asks whether we need to get the data for the merge. I'm assuming you're asking whether you need to download the harmonized HRS dataset. If that's the question, the answer is yes, and you can download both of them from the same location as they're distributed by the HRS. And if that didn't answer your question, please feel free to ask again. Another question asks whether we can use the same code to compare the data to share. Yep, I would say you'd be able to. However, you may have to modify some of the variable names, as some of the variables in share may have a different not naming convention, but literally a different name, although some may be exactly the same. So, but if you'd like to convey this analysis, the commands should be, you can freely use those. The merge, so I guess KLoSA uploaded something that was called a merge data. Will you please email us about this question so that we can do a little bit of research and give you the correct answer? I'm not quite sure as we stand right now whether what that is. My guess is that perhaps it includes the imputation files as well, but I'm not 100% sure. So if you don't mind just addressing this question and sending it to our help@g2aging.org, that would be great. Are there any more questions? Okay, thank you so much for your participation. We appreciate the questions and would appreciate your participation in the questionnaire as well. Thank you so much and have a great day. Bye.